اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أتوجه إليك، اللهم إني أسألك وأتوجه إليك بنبيك نبي الرحمة محمد صلى الله عليه وآله. يا أبا القاسم يا رسول الله، يا إمام الرحمة يا سيدنا ومولانا، إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا. يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله. يا أبا الحسن يا أمير المؤمنين، يا ولي ابن أبي طالب، يا حجة الله على خلقه، يا سيدنا ومولانا، إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا. يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله. يا فاطمة الزهراء يا بنت محمد، يا قرة عين الرسول، يا سيدتنا ومولاتنا، إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا. يا وجيهة عند الله اشفعي لنا عند الله. يا أبا محمد يا حسن بن علي، أيها المجتبى يا ابن رسول الله، يا حجة الله على خلقه، يا سيدنا ومولانا، إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا. يا وجيها يا أبا عبد الله يا حسين بن علي، أيها الشهيد يا ابن رسول الله، يا حجة الله على خلقه، يا سيدنا ومولانا، إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا. يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله. يا أبا الحسن يا ولي ابن الحسين، يا زين العابدين يا ابن رسول الله، يا حجة الله على خلقه، يا سيدنا ومولانا، إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا يا أبا جعفر يا محمد بن علي أيها الباقر يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها يا أبا عبد الله يا جعفر بن محمد أيها الصادق يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها يا أبا الحسن يا موسى بن جعفر أيها الكاظم يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها يا أبا الحسن يا علي بن موسى أيها الرضا يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا يا أبا جعفر يا محمد بن علي أيها التقي الجواد يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها يا أبا الحسن يا ولي بن محمد أيها الهادي النقي يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله يا أبا محمد يا حسن بن علي أيها الزكي العسكري يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها اشفع لنا عند الله يا وصي الحسن والخلف الحجة أيها القائم المنتظر المهدي يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله. Ask for your hajat from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. يا سادتي ومواليا إني توجهت بكم أئمتي وعدتي ليوم فخري وحاجتي إلى الله وتوسلت بكم إلى الله واستشفعت بكم إلى الله فاشفعوا لي عند الله واستنقذوني من ذنوبي عند الله فإنكم وسيلتي إلى الله وبحبكم وبقربكم أرجو نجاة من الله فكونوا عند الله رجائي يا سادتي يا أولياء الله صلى الله عليهم أجمعين ولعن الله أعداء الله ظالميهم من الأولين والآخرين آمين رب العالمين. اللهم صل على لأرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات. فاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين بالقاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. أما بعد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Tuesday night program, Dua Tawassul. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the Tawassul of Masumeen alayhi salatu wassalam. May Allah forgive all our sins, fulfill all our hajat, and make our end khatma bil khair, inshallah, and provide us with the company of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad in the hereafter. As we go through these ayyam azam, these are the days, the beginning of the month of Safar. And when you recall in the history, the first few days of the month of Safar were the beginning of that calamity for which our fourth Imam cried by saying, Asham, Asham, Asham. And you hear this a lot in the majalis, in the masaib, that Imam would constantly remember Sham, not as much as he would remember Kufa or Karbala for that matter. The reason Imam would not recall the events of Karbala is because the hikmat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was that He kept our Imam bimar for those few days of the shahadat of the 72 martyrs of Karbala. For example, when we talk about the illness of Imam, that probably started, according to the most authentic riwayat, probably towards the 7th and 8th of Muharram. Imam alayhi salatu wasalam was not sick before that. He was well. When they left Medina, Imam was well. When they left Makkah, Imam was well. It wasn't that, na'udhu billah, I'm using it not in a derogatory sense, that people were dragging Imam all this distance, like you would drag someone who's sick and bimar. Back in the day, they didn't have these ambulances, right? If you've seen the portrayal of the previous movies that are made about the past and the history of Masumeen or the prophets, they would have something attached to the carriage upon which the person who's sick would be dragged onto it. Well, that's not the case. Or for example, inside the carriages. Imam ﷺ fell sick probably in the first 7 days of the entrance into the land of Karbala. And then Imam probably remained sick for the next 4 or 5 days until they reach Kufa. And then we don't find the illness of Imam Zainul Abidin. Now we call him Bimar-e Karbala. There's nothing wrong with that because he was Bimar in Karbala and that was the Mashiach of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But to make it sound like that Imam was Bimar for the entirety of this trip, no, that's not the case. Imam, once he arrives in Kufa, on the way to Kufa, Imam was still sick. Why? Riwayat suggest that when on the 11th of Muharram, everybody mounted their horses and camels, Imam Zainul Abidin was so weak that he could not mount himself climb onto the sawari himself. Bibi Zainab helps him get onto his horse or his camel or whatever that Imam was riding. And it is also mentioned in Riwayat that Imam was so sick that he could not control his balance on top of this. So what did the enemies do? They tied his feet so that he would not fall off the horse. But once they arrive in Kufa, you find the khutbah of Imam Zainul Abidin. You find that Imam Zainul Abidin stands up and speaks and addresses Ibn Ziyad and the company. Now would you imagine someone who was sick and ill would do that? So Imam's bimari is probably 4 or 5 days. And that was all the mashiach of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that Imam would not have to fight. Another wisdom behind keeping Imam ill for these days is so that Imam did not witness with his own eyes the shahadat of all of the martyrs of Karbala. Meaning when Imam Hussein was martyred, Imam Zainul Abidin was on his bed. He was sick. He couldn't open his eyes. When Hazrat Ali Akbar was martyred, Imam Zainul Abidin was sick. He did not know that Hazrat Ali Akbar was killed. Hazrat Abbas, and the proof of that is when Imam Hussein raises the istaghasa and he comes into the tent, that's when Hazrat Imam Zainul Abidin wants to come out. Now he's awakened because he hears the hujjat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raising the istaghasa. So you have to say back to that. So Imam gets up. This is where Imam Hussein comes to him and he says, what is your intention, O my son? He said, Mawla, you said as you raise the istaghasa, and I have to say labbaik to it. Imam said, no, this is the easier part. At that point, the mukalama between Imam Zainul Abidin and Imam Hussain is, Imam Zainul Abidin asks, oh my father, where's Chacha Abbas? He says, Qad qutil. Where's my brother Ali Akbar? Qad qutil. Where's my brother Qasim? Qad qutil. Where is this? Where is this? Where are the companions? In other words, Imam Zainul Abidin is asking about every individual. And Imam Hussain kept on repeating, Qad qutil, Qad qutil. They all been killed, they've been killed, they've been killed. And then Imam said at the end, they all have been killed. You and I are the only male survivors, or you and I are the only adult survivors of this camp. So from this aspect, we understand that Imam Zainul Abidin did not witness the shahadat of each and every single individual with his own eyes. Now, of course, even other individuals like Bibi Zainab, you can't say, well, she witnessed every one of these events. Because when it comes to the shahadat of Imam Hussain, she climbs onto Tilla Zainabiyya to be able to see that. But you don't find that in regards to others. In fact, Imam Hussain kept on sending her back inside the camp, inside the tent. That even when Imam Hussain was alive, but he was under attack, he said, oh Zainab, go back to your tent. So when Hazrat Ali Akbar was martyred, Janab Zainab did not see that. But the body of Hazrat Ali Akbar is brought. That's when Girya and Bain and all that stuff begins. So from this aspect, Imam Zainul Abidin was inside this tent. This could also be a wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala of keeping him sick for throughout the combat, so that he doesn't witness these heart-wrenching events with his own eyes. And because he has to lead the ummah for the next 35 years, that he is going to be the imam of this ummah, this will be, as is difficult, that he wakes up this morning, he sees that all of his family members have been killed, let alone witnessing every single one of these events. So with that said, with this muqaddamah in mind, we see that these are the times when Imam enters into Sham, Damascus. So therefore, the reason why Imam Zainul Abidin says Ash-Sham, 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 and not Karbala, 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 is one of these reasons. That number one, the biggest calamity happened in Karbala. Biggest calamity did not happen in Kufa, nor was the calamity in Sham as big. The biggest of the calamities, if you were to ask any historian, if you were to ask yourselves as well, that out of the three cities, Karbala, Kufa, and Sham, which one you think is where the biggest tragedy happened? All of us would say unanimously, Karbala. That's where the blood was spilled. That's where they were mercilessly killed. That's where they were butchered. That's where all these atrocities happened. Not only that they were killed, their heads were severed. Not only their heads were severed, they were trampled. So all these atrocities happened where? In Karbala. Kufa, yes, they are being paraded without their veils, which is a matter of shame and sharm for them, but nonetheless, it's still not as big as being martyred. Because I'll give you an example of that. Bibi Zainab asks Imam Zainul Abidin, oh my son, the tents are on fire. Should we remain inside and get burned, or should we leave? We don't have the hijabs. We don't have our veils. Imam Zainul Abidin responded by saying, Anti alimatun ghairu muallima. You know better, O Pupiyamma. You know better. You know that you have to save your life. Saving life is superior than other things. So yes, go outside, even if it's for the sake of, even if it's on the cost of, exposing yourself and not having the proper hijab. So same thing, they didn't have hijab in Kufa, which is a big, very big tragedy for the family of Rasulullah, especially for the Bibi Zainab. Why? You've heard this in riwayat as well. I'm sure those ulama and the scholars have talked about it here, that the neighbor of Imam Ali did not even know that there's a daughter by the name Zainab, which means that he never heard or seen Bibi Zainab. So when he's never heard or seen Bibi Zainab, being a neighbor of Imam Ali for all these years, that means Imam Ali kept this hijab and this parda, and of course, whenever Bibi Zainab would go for the ziyarat of her mother, she would go at night time. Nighttime would be the journey. This will take place at the dark of the night in between Hassan and Hussein, and that's how she would go to the graveyard to do the ziyarat of Bibi Fatma Zahra sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So with that said, Imam Zain al-Abidin's biggest tragedy would be then Asham. Asham. Imam enters the city of Damascus, or Baladu Sham, as this whole land is called Sham. And that's where Imam ﷺ witnesses the most heart-wrenching events. And therefore, every time food would be brought to him, every time something to drink would be brought to him, Imam would lay his eyes on the food, Imam would lay his eyes on the water, and Imam would start weeping. Imam would start crying. So these are the days in which Ahl Haram are now entering into the place called Sham. Now there are many atrocities that are lined up. From the very beginning, you see that Ahl Haram are not given access to go inside. They are made to wait outside of the city limits. Why? Because the city is now being decorated. It is being decorated so that it shows as if there's some sort of festivity that is going on. And hukm of their Amir is, according to Sa'd ibn Sahal al-Sa'idi, companion of Rasulullah, who was coming back from Hajj, he took the route of Baitul Maqdis and he entered from the western side of Damascus, not from the eastern side. So he had no idea. And so when he enters, he sees Damascus is decorated. It's like festivities going on. Kind of like if you can imagine in this day and age, whenever there's, Christmas, or whenever there's, or when we were in Pakistan, 14th August, 14th of August, you'd see the flags and sort of green color all over the place. And I'm sure other countries as well, when their independence comes. It's in the festive mood. Everybody's 3 days holiday, for example, and you're dressed nicely. Eid, for example, for us, when we come for Eid, it's a different environment altogether. That's how they were portraying it. So Sa'd said, as far as I remember, Muslims live in Damascus. You all are Muslims. What festivity do you have in the month of Muharram? Or month of Safar, for that matter? Month of Muharram and Safar. So this is probably the month of Safar, the beginning of month of Safar. So what festivity do we have in a religion of Islam that you're celebrating right now? Something happened? And so of course, you've heard in the Masa'ib, he was told that a rebel was killed, a Baghi was killed in Karbala, and his family was made captives, and now they're being brought into the city. They said, who is this Baghi? Do you know his name? And why you all? So because of that, Amir has said that we all should enjoy and we all should celebrate this victory that we have gained. Allah has given us this victory and we're celebrating. I said, okay, fine. Who's this Qaidi? Who's this rebel that you're referring to? So his name is Hussein ibn Ali. Upon hearing this, of course, this is Sahabi Rasul. He's an old man. He's seen Rasulullah. He's seen Imam Ali. He's seen Imam Hussein from a very young age. Now when he hears this, and he's a true follower of Ahlul Bayt, when he hears this, he just couldn't imagine his ears. He said, there could be a day comes in my life when people refer to Hussein ibn Ali as a rebel, someone who stood up against this Khalifa of the time. So of course, he raises his voice and he asks, where's this qafla coming in from? He goes to the door where this qafla was being entering. Once they enter, now they're passing through these streets. Bibi Kulsum is said to speak to Shimr at this moment. She goes up to Shimr and she says, "Oh Shimr, I have a request." And Shimr, of course, now just hearing this, that someone like Bibi Kulsum, goes up to someone like Shimr al-Joshan and says, "I have a request." But nonetheless, because they've been traveling for the past month, on foot, on these horses and on these carriages, there's this courage now that she wants to talk. And so she asks, "Oh Shimr, you see that we don't have any proper hijab on us. Wouldn't it make sense to separate us from these heads of the shuhada so that people don't see us? Because all these people have come in large numbers." Now first, she is requesting someone la'im like Shimr. That itself is a big tragedy. Number two, look at what he says. That is even a bigger tragedy. And thirdly, what Kulthum must have felt after this response. He says, this is the reason people have come out, and you want us to separate you? This is the reason people have been gathered. They've been told to come out to witness you in this way. What else you think these people are here for? What else you think these people are doing over here? They are purposefully brought to witness this historic event. And you want us to go ahead and destroy this? You want us to go ahead and ruin this? No. This is how it's going to happen. You go back to where you were. Now, of course, she's a lady. She's a courageous lady. But at this moment, courage is not the right thing to show. Valor is not the right thing to show. She should not show her valor and courage at this moment, because this is where the hands are tied. There's no veil, and everybody is being brought in as a qaidi. This is where Sahal ibn Sa'ad plays a role, where he asks Bibi Sakina as to what can I do for you? She says the same thing, separate the heads with the ladies. And so he says, sure. He goes up to some other people who were carrying or bringing this qafla inside. He said, I have 400 dinar with me. I'll give it to you. But there's a request that I have for you. Said, what is the request? So, well, separate the heads with the ladies who are on the horses. So, Riwayat mentioned that they took the money and they did so to an extent. This is when the qafla now enters into the Darbar of Yazid. Now, Darbar of Yazid itself, there's so many events that are mentioned that are listed in the history book that happened. There were some inqilabat that actually took place in the Darbar of Yazid. Now there's an incident of our fourth Imam, which tells you the fourth Imam is no longer sick or ill. Yes, he must be sick and ill of the atrocities. Yes, he's sick and ill because he's got, these tawq and these shackles all around him. And he's been walking like this for many days. He might be sick because of that. But from the aspect of being, unconscious or sick, no, that is not the case. In fact, Imam is in complete control. And that's why when a person, either this event is from Kufa or this is from Sham, both have been narrated. But nonetheless, an old man comes up and mocks Imam. Now, when you see younger folks make fun, young kids make fun, you can say, well, they don't know that reality. That's why they're making fun. They don't know the haqiqat. They are na ashna. And therefore, they'll make these statements. But when someone as old as this man was, who started mocking Imam Zainul Abidin, Imam ﷺ composed himself, and Imam said to him that, do you know who we are? Because I know no one in their right conscience would say these things to us if they knew who we were. He said, no, I don't know who you are. He said, have you read Quran? He said, yes, I have read Quran. I'm Hafiz of Quran, for example. I know many ayat of Quran, for example. And Imam said, well, Imam must have thought to himself, and we paraphrase and we think about it ourselves, that what good is reading Quran when you don't know what is being said in Quran? When you don't know these ayat of Quran, who they refer to, who are they speaking about, the haqq of these ayat, when you don't understand the reality of these ayat, what good is this Quran going to do to you? And therefore, just memorizing this Quran without understanding it has no purpose. So therefore, Imam then starts reading ayat after ayat. And this is where you see, of course, he's Imam. So you'd imagine that he has this knowledge, but nonetheless, to compose himself with shackles and everything, with ladies along with him, and he being the Imam now, he starts reciting ayat of Quran. He said, have you read this ayat which says, وَآتِ ذَا الْقُرْبَ حَقَّهُ? That give the qarabadar their haqq. He said, yeah, I've read it. Do you know who these Dhul Qurba are? I don't know. Imam then recited the first ayat of 10th juz. وَعْلَمُوا أَنَّمَا غَنِمْتُم مِّن شَيْءٍ فَأَنَّ لِلَّهِ خُمُسَهُ وَلِلرَّسُولِ وَلِذِي الْقُرْبَى. The ayat of khums said, whenever you reach or you gain some ghanimat, 1/5 khums belongs to Allah, His apostle, and his family. You say, you know who the family of Rasulullah is? I don't know. Then Imam recited ayat of Tathir. إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ لِيُذْهِبَ عَنْكُمُ الرِّجْسَ أَهْلَ الْبَيْتِ. He said, you know who these Ahlul Bayt are? I don't know. I mean, he knows who the Ahlul Bayt are. He knows who the family of Rasulullah are. But he doesn't know in person who they are because he's never seen them. He's lived in Sham all his life. Then Imam says, I am so and so. We are that Ahlul Bayt. We are that Qarabatar. We are the ones that this ayat of Quran is referring to. We are the haqdar of that khums that this ayat of Quran is referring to. We are that ayat, misdaq of that ayat tathir which this ayat is referring to. And upon hearing this, of course, this is where in the most difficult of the situations, Imam not losing his cool and countering with the ayat of Quran, Imam could have just shunned this man away. Imam could have just, walked past. إِذَا خَاطَبَهُمُ الْجَاهِلُونَ قَالُوا سَلَامًا. Imam could have done that. When Juhala are speaking to you, just say peace be on you and walk your way. But that's not the case all the time. Imam saw that there was a possibility that this man is doing all of this out of ignorance. And even in these difficult situations, Imam is not letting go of the hope of, bringing about awareness. So, if anything, if we don't learn anything from our fourth Imam, although there's so much to learn from our fourth Imam, his akhlaq, his du'as, his risalatul huquq, and the tragic life that he lived up until the battle of Karbala, and the tragedy after and the post-Karbala that he, endured. All of that is a lesson for us. But if there's one thing that we can derive from the life of Imam, is that never give up. لا تقنطوا من روح الله. لا تيأسوا من روح الله. Don't lose hope from the rahmat and the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Losing hope and hopelessness leads to kufr. And therefore, Imam says very beautifully in one of his hadiths, إِنِّي لَا أَخَافُ مِن ذُنُوبِكُمْ كَمَا أَخَافُ مِن قُنُوتِكُمْ. He said to his companions, I'm not afraid of your sins, but I'm afraid of your hopelessness, despair. Sins, yes, Allah will forgive if you ask for tawbah sincerely. But hopelessness, there's no hope for hopelessness, right? There's no tawbah for that, because that leads to kufr. So Imam, in those dire situations, Imam has the courage, of course, he has the ability, and he counters this man with complete, composure, and does not lose his cool at that moment. So then right away, this man is affected by the words of Imam. Now he realizes the mistake that he was making. He understands that he was mocking someone wrong. He understands who this man is and who these Ahl Haram are. And so he asks for forgiveness and repents. Now this is where the family is brought inside the Darbar of Yazid. Darbar of Yazid is the same way decorated. Some of you, those of you who have gone to Sham, when you enter Jami Umawi Kabir in Damascus, besides where the Haram of Bibi Sakina is, near that, on the back side of it. And this is also where the grave of Salahuddin Ayyubi is. This is also close to Bab Saghir, where all the heads were brought and they were placed over there. Then there's a maqam over there. And many other personalities are buried in that graveyard of Bab Saghir. Jami Umawi Kabir is told to be the same place as the Darbar of Yazid. So if you walk in, it's a huge mosque, probably these two halls twice or three times the size. And then there's this sort of like a platform which is raised, and say, well, that's where Yazid and his close companions were sitting, and the Qaidi were then brought into. Now they refer to that Bazar-e-Sham to be the same Bazar, but there's dispute about that is probably not the same Bazar. At that time, this Bazar that exists now was not there. It was from the other side, but nonetheless, may God know, God knows only what is right, but nonetheless, that's where they were brought in. And once they're brought in, there are many things that you witness. First thing that you witness is that there's inqilab happening inside Yazid's stronghold. This is where his government is. This is where his stronghold is. You know who are the people that bring inqilab? One companion of Rasulullah, one Christian, and some mention a Jew as well, and as well as Yazid's own wife and daughter. These are the people who oppose Yazid at this moment. Of course, the eloquent khutbah of Bibi Zainab is there. Of course, the eloquent khutbah of Imam Zainul Abidin is there, where he, after hearing all the trash that was being said by Yazid and his people, Imam says, give me an opportunity to climb on these pieces of wood that you call mimbar, and let me say a few words. Yazid knows better. He says, if I let him say, then he could turn things around. But people say, he's in shackles, he's battered around, young man, you've seen him, what is he capable of doing? Just let him say. It would be harsh of you not to let him speak. That was a mistake, of course, and Yazid knew about it. In fact, he admits the fact that you don't know these people. The ilm is vested into them. They don't acquire knowledge like you and I. So that much knowledge Yazid has about Imam Zainul Abidin. But the inqilab that happens is when Bibi Zainab says, oh Yazid, is it fair that your sisters and your daughters and your wife and your female family, in fact, all of your female family members are covered in hijab, because still he is Khalifatul Muslimin. They're all covered in hijab and properly dressed and in the proper attire, while the daughters of Rasulullah are standing like this. Is this fair? Can you imagine? The Bibi Zainab says that right away, awakens the conscience of many who were in this long slumber. And then this inqilab these words affected the wife and the daughter of Yazid, who spoke out and said, Yazid, she's right in what she's saying. And they opposed their own person, family member. The second inqilab is by witnessing something. So the first inqilab happened by hearing the words of Bibi Zainab. Second, upon the Christian and the Jewish ambassadors who were there in the gathering. What happened was that Yazid was striking on the face of Imam Hussein with his stick. You hear this in Masai. One of the companions, Zayd ibn Arqam is the name mentioned in some riwayat or other names, who saw this. Now, of course, in that darbar, you're not allowed to speak, but he speaks out. He said, oh Yazid, stop what you're doing. He said, who spoke? You're not allowed to speak. And then everybody could focus onto him. He said, stop what you're doing. By God, I've seen Rasulullah kiss these lips. I've seen Rasulullah kiss this forehead. I've seen Rasulullah kiss these cheeks, that the ones that you are striking with your own stick. And so right away, this Christian ambassador from Pope, from Rome, asks, oh Yazid, who's this man referring to? Whose head is this? And so the Yazid said, well, none of your business. Stay out of it. This is our internal matter. He said, well, it might be your internal matter, but I need to report everything back to my, Pope and my king. Whatever I see over here, I have to report it back. When he insists, Yazid tells him, this is Hussein, grandson of Rasulullah. He says, woe unto you and to your religion, that this is how you treat the grandson of your prophet. He says, because Rasulullah has said to me, there's a hadith of Rasulullah that says that those non-Muslims who are under your protection, you should not harm them. If you harm them, there's Jahannam for you. If there's a non-Muslim under your protection in your country, if you harm that non-Muslim, Jahannam is your abode. He said this to this ambassador. He said, if it wasn't for this hadith of Rasulullah, I would have punished you right now for challenging me. So right away he responded by saying, you remember the hadith of Rasul which says, don't harm a non-Muslim under your protection. You think if Rasulullah is commanding you to not harm a non-Muslim under your protection, you think he's going to allow you to go ahead and harm his own grandkids? Does that make sense? And so that enrages Yazid even more. He said, if something which is stopping you from killing me is my religion, I announce that I am Muslim as well, and I announce my religion of Islam, and I am the follower of Rasulullah, and I believe in this head, that this is the head of Rasulullah's grandson, and so on and so forth. Things that he had to say, he said. Inqilab, right away. Of course, at that point, Yazid has no choice but to go ahead and kill him as well. Zayd ibn Arqam, who spoke up regarding him, is also mentioned that he was also apprehended, and he was also killed as well. Of course, Yazid couldn't do anything about his own wife and daughter. He couldn't just go ahead and kill them. But nonetheless, they raised this inqilab. They brought about this inqilab as well. All of these things are, of course, different aspects of looking at what took place and transpired in that court of Yazid. Now, of course, towards the Masaib and a few words of Musibah, we see that Bibi Zainab was avoiding talking to Yazid. I always quote this because this is really the epitome of Musibat of Bibi Zainab. That when an Alim-e-Din was listening to the Masaib of the Darbar of Sham, the reciter said, Yazid said, who is this lady who's sitting in that corner, mutanakkira? And nobody wanted to respond, and all the women folk were covering Bibi Zainab. Yazid asked again, who is that lady sitting in that corner? And eventually said, well, this is Zainab, daughter of Ali. And this is where Yazid said, I want to speak to Zainab. This Alim-e-Din who was sitting, he said, stop. Don't read anything after this. This is enough of a tragedy. The Yazid wants to be hamkalam with the daughter of Amir al-Mu'mineen. There could not be a bigger tragedy than that. Stop. Stop the musibat right here. Don't read any further than that. But of course, what happened after that is when Yazid gets enraged with the words of Bibi Zainab. He orders her to be struck as well. Fidda sees that Zainab is under attack. Fidda goes in front of Bibi Zainab and says, oh Yazid, if you strike Zainab, you'll have to hit Fidda first. Fidda could see that there were all of these Habshi Ulam, or there were all of these Habshi warriors that were standing in the court of Yazid. She called upon them saying, when Yazid said, hit Fidda as well, who is she to go ahead and stop my orders? She calls upon all of these Jawans saying, what happened to your zeal? What happened to your ghayrat, that a lady from your own country, from your own nijad is being attacked while you stand there? What kind of men are you? These men right away drew their swords and they said, oh Yazid, if anyone dared attack Fidda, there will not be any soul that survives over here. There will be blood all over the place. Then Yazid refrained himself from attacking Fidda and attacking Bibi Zainab. Of course, this is where Zainab feels even more tragic. She looks towards Najaf. She looks towards Medina and says, oh Baba, how lucky is Fidda that still there are people who are defending her. And how unlucky are we, your children, that there's no one to go ahead and speak on our behalf. Wa akhir dawana, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen.